So what we're going to do is look at enduring issues, essays again. All right, so what I've given you is a collection of documents, and these are the documents that we're going to be using. And I also gave you in the post for today a list of enduring issues, many of which you've seen before. Okay, but it's not an all-encompassing list though. And I also gave you like another how-to guide for how to do this. And we're going to take this piece by piece to make sure that we practice it and that you're comfortable with it when you guys take your Regents exam in June. But maybe somebody can remind me what enduring issue means before we go any further. Okay, right, an issue that's been consistent in human history, right? And these are big, broad things. What do we mean by issue? Okay, so an issue can be a problem, but it can also be something that has both positive and negative side effects, right? Like the impact of technology. Technology brings a lot of good, but also maybe some negative. So it doesn't have to be solely a completely negative, problematic thing. It could be maybe a little bit of both. Right, so I gave you guys a bunch of issues. Again, not all encompassing. We know that conflict is an issue, right? Because sometimes people get hurt in a conflict. Things are issues if they affect people, right? Desire for power. If someone's trying to take over a country and leading a revolution, people obviously are affected by that. When people don't have freedoms and they want them, obviously people are affected by that. Inequality, technology, interdependence, right? These are all problematic, at least ish things that we've always had to deal with. So when we do an enduring issues essay, the very first step, guys, is to take a look at your 5 documents, figure them out, right, what they're about, and try to identify an issue common in at least 3 out of the 5. So what we're going to do today and tomorrow is take you through my process of looking at these documents and getting them set up for when we actually have to write the essay. So before we do anything, take a look at, in your packet, document 2. But I gave you document 2 twice. So go to page 3 where you see document 2 with these notes on the bottom. And this is what I'm going to encourage you guys to do for every one of the documents, whether it's now or in June. Right now I can require it, but in June I would recommend it. For every document, give yourself some notes. The main ideas from the source, like who, what, when, where, why type stuff. Outside information that you can kind of brainstorm. And maybe the name of an event and maybe some possible enduring issues. Okay, so this particular document, I'm going to kind of go over it with you and take you through my thought process as to how I generated these notes. Document 2 says, one of the major commodities exported from India to Britain was tea. What does it mean to export something? Yeah, to ship it out, right? I'm selling it and shipping it out. So tea is something that's going to be shipped out of India to Britain. A growing industry. By 1900, there were around 4,000 tea estates in North and South India. An estate is a large piece of land dedicated to farming, as well as over 2,000 in Ceylon, which is an island off the coast of India. Today it's called Sri Lanka. This popular drink generated a hugely profitable industry, and a tea culture emerged in Britain with its own quintessentially, meaning classically, English customs and rituals. So Lipton's teas, I'm sure you've heard of Lipton's teas. They've been around forever. Okay, maybe your parents have it in a cabinet. I see it in the stores all the time. Okay, so this is a newspaper advertisement, the London Illustrated News. On the bottom it says 1892, so a while back. Direct from the tea garden to the teapot, no middleman's profits to pay. What is this idea of a middleman? We've talked about this. When it comes to trade, what does it mean if someone acts as a middleman? Or give me an example. I would call Target a middleman, Walmart. Yeah, okay, there's no factory in the back of the Target store, right? There's no factory in the back of Walmart. They get supply from somewhere, probably in Asia. They bring it to this Target store, then they sell it to you for double the price, right? That's how Target or Walmart makes money. So Lipton's tea is claiming here that our prices are low. Why? There is no middleman. That's implying that Lipton's teas is in India, planting all these tea leaves and converting all this land into tea estates. Can you eat tea leaves, you think? Like to sustain an entire diet? Definitely not. So what would you call tea then? What kind of crop? Cash crop, outstanding, right? Something that we grow not to eat so much, but to sell, okay? That's great if it's profitable and you can make a lot of money, that's awesome, but there is a negative side effect of that. What's a negative side effect if you're converting so much of your land to growing tea leaves or other cash crops like cotton? Exactly, right? You're not growing food, so you can't take care of yourself, And now you're interdependent with somebody else to get the food that you need. Right now I have to buy expensive food from somewhere else. So that could be problematic if all you're doing is growing one thing. You want to be diversified. Sure, grow the tea, but if it was up to the Indian people, they probably would also want to grow, I don't know, something to eat so they could sustain themselves without having to rely on the British. So when I look at this source, these are the notes that I came up with. And again, of course, this is tainted by the fact that I've done this for 11 years now and I know a lot of the history. So your list, at least for maybe the 3 right-hand columns, might be less, it might be more than what you guys could generate. But the summary stuff is pretty simple, right? These are the big ideas from the document about who, what, when, where, and why. Tea was a major export from India to Britain. Tea trade was a profitable industry. Lipton's teas did not have to use a middleman. That's a big part of this, right? Because they're in control of the industry. That means they're the ones profiting from it. Thousands of estates in India dedicated to growing tea leaves, right? Those are the big ideas from the source. So when I'm looking at a relationship between Britain and India, I'm thinking about the era of imperialism, right? When the British took over India. So I'm thinking about that and I'm putting that down here. It looks to me like Lipton's tea is controlling a lot of land there for their own benefit, right? No more middleman. It's not like they're buying it from Indian farmers. They're the ones doing the planting. They're the ones taking the crops. British East India Company is something I remember from that time period, right? Before the British government took over India, it allowed these corporations to go there, and the British government, by law, allowed them to raise their own army and to own property. Right? And they're the ones that began the process of exploiting India for the benefit of the business. So much so that they had their own army. If you guys remember that video clip I showed you guys, right, where the Indian soldiers that were working for the East India Company, they were told to rip open their bullet cartridges, right, to fill their guns up, but they were greased with like pork or cow fat, and that freaked them out. And it launched this whole rebellion that got suppressed in 1857. Right? Because guys, when you write your enduring issues essay, you're going to want to load it up with as much outside information as you can. That's one of the tickets to getting a good grade. We talked about cash crops, right? It's not mentioned in the document, but maybe I take an opportunity to define what a cash crop is. I put down Gandhi here because Gandhi is the one that finally kicked the British out. Right? So maybe I extend my paragraph to writing about how Gandhi would lead civil disobedience against the British, and then India had control over its own country again. This last bit is from the Edpuzzle video that you guys watched on Friday. Maybe some of you guys finished it. And it kind of is a concept that helps rectify 100 or so years of India being exploited for cash crops. Do you guys remember anything about the Green Revolution? Green Revolution, guys, is when, beginning around the 1950s, scientists figure out how to cross-pollinate plants to do crossbreeds, better fertilizers, better pesticides, genetically modified organisms to produce food, which in and of itself, right, these things can be problematic. There's a reason why some people buy organic, because they don't want pesticides in their food. But the point is, India is using all these innovations, and China too, to kind of undo what the cash crop economy did to them, right? They were dependent on other people for food. Now you're independent, you want to grow your own food, you got to find ways to do that quickly, right? Because India has a huge population. So again, I just threw in some outside information here that I could use. I might not use all of it, but something I could use in my essay. I see this document, I gave it an event title. I'm just calling this event in history, Britain's tea trade with India. Okay, because when we write about these events, we don't want to just say, oh, document 3 talks about. No, I want to write about the name of an event. And these are some of the issues that I saw in this document. Impact of cheap labor, right? We see that the Lipton's Tea Company is making a ton of money because they're the ones in control and they're using Indians to kind of do the work for them. Here's another word from that video from Friday, globalization. Yeah, the world is connected together through trade, which has both positive and negative effects, right? A company like Apple exists in multiple places, and you can do that because you're connected together with not only through trade, but also through technology. So Apple might decide, okay, we're gonna have software engineers working in California, but they are expensive per hour. Where can we get cheap labor? Oh, I don't know, we'll go to Asia. We'll build a factory there, and the people in China will assemble the iPhones. And because we're connected together through trade, we can make that possible, right? So we have cheap iPhones, but we also have exploited Chinese workers, perhaps, right? So maybe positive and negative. So we see that here, right? Because India and Britain are connected, someone's benefiting from that relationship, maybe someone's not. Industrialization I see here, because we're processing tea leaves into finished manufactured products. Treatment of workers might be here. Interconnectedness is another word for trade. Impact of capitalism, I'm throwing in here. Maybe someone can remind me, in capitalism, what's the sole reason why someone goes into business in a capitalist society? To make money, right? The government does not get involved so much. They let you open up a business, they let you hire workers, and you make a profit. This is absolutely an example of the impact of capitalism, right? If capitalism didn't exist, there wouldn't be a Lipton's tea company obtaining a profit through the tea trade. Okay, so since capitalism exists and the Lipton's tea company can make money, that's why the situation is unfolding the way it is here. Inequality, right? Maybe the British are making money off tea, but not the Indians. And the impact of imperialism. Some of these things are a little bit repetitive. Maybe one issue kind of absorbs the other. I'm just brainstorming a list here. And you want to come up with as many as you can because, again, guys, in the end, you're going to have to look back at these documents and say, oh man, is there one common in at least 3 out of the 5? And the more you brainstorm throughout this process, it makes that identification of common issues a little bit easier. Okay, I know that seems kind of overwhelming. That's because it is. But if we practice it a few times, I think it'll be okay. So what I want you to do is, I want you to recreate this chart, the 4-column chart with these 4 titles, recreate this for me underneath document 1. So this thing here that we just did, or that I just did for you, copy the 4 columns and the 4 titles underneath document number 1. So we're going to take a look at document number 1 together and see if we can piece together some bullet points. Okay, when you guys do bullet points for main ideas, you're looking for who, what, when, where, why, maybe even how. But not complete sentences, you're just trying to get a general gist here. So we've got Pat Hudson, the Workshop of the World, BBC History Online. Okay, BBC in this context stands for British Broadcasting Corporation, 2011. And it says, in this excerpt, the transformation of the British economy is discussed. Interesting. You should already know what happened in Britain that shows a transforming economy that we've learned about in this class. How was Britain transformed economically in this school year? What did we learn about? The Industrial Revolution. Okay, that's what I would expect to see in this document when I see British economy is being transformed, right? We're shifting the way things are produced. That's what economies are all about, right? Making goods and services. So for a few decades in the 19th century, pause. What years of the 19th century? The 1800s, yes. So the century number is always 1 higher than the year numbers.
That makes sense.
It makes sense. It's just weird. This is why I teach history and not math. It's very complicated. For a few decades in the 1800s, British manufactured goods dominated world trade. Most manufactured items were produced more efficiently and competitively in Britain than elsewhere. She also had the commercial, she meaning Britain in this context, she also had the commercial, financial, and political power to edge out rivals at home and abroad. So no one can compete with the British. Something they did made them unstoppable. We got to figure out what that is still. In some industries, most notably textiles, massive changes took place in technology. Can we recall what that word textiles is? Yeah, anything stitched together. Most likely clothing, could be towels, blankets, stuff like that. Okay? So in some industries, most notably woven goods industry, massive changes took place in technology and in the organization of production, causing dramatic productivity growth. Try to put it into regular people's terms. If productivity is increasing, is that implying that I'm producing goods more slowly or more quickly? More quickly, right? Better productivity means I'm producing more stuff. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, that must be about factories and machines and stuff, right? This in turn brought a steep decline in prices. Remind me, guys, why is it that when we have, why would the Industrial Revolution cause lower prices? Okay, right, cheap labor in the factories, meaning I don't have to pay people a lot so I could afford to keep my prices low. You're absolutely right. And you have more of it, right? Whenever there's more of something out there, the price for that thing comes down. So if more clothes are out there, that means some of those clothes might end up at the Marshalls, and that's where I go to buy it at a discount, okay, or the Kohl's. In many other sectors, meaning other industries, more modest organizational improvements coupled with greater specialization and the employment of cheap labor brought similar though less dramatic results, right? So in other industries, by using machines and really cheap labor, we're making more stuff at lower prices. An unprecedented range and variety of products thus came within the grasp of a new mass market, meaning there's more people out there that can buy all these different kinds of products now, both within Britain and also overseas. So if we're talking about overseas, does that imply that some kind of trade is going on here? Absolutely. No other country could at first compete, so Britain became the workshop of the world. Right? So when the Industrial Revolution first begins, Britain is making all kinds of stuff at the cheapest prices, so everyone was buying British-made products. So underneath that, let's start building some notes. So if you were to give me some main ideas from this document, give me some stuff that we saw here. Okay, Britain was dominating world trade, right? Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe we can get into why or how this is happening with another part of the story. Okay, Britain dominated other parts of the world. Right, so maybe they had access to some natural resources. That would definitely help them. What else though, guys? Right? What allowed the British to have all these products for sale at low prices? Okay, right? Britain industrialized and mass-produced goods using machines. Those words aren't there like word for word, but we can read between the lines, right? When I say economic transformation, that's what's being referred to here, right? People used to make quilts and shirts and pillows by hand. Now we're using machines to do it. Is there anything else here that might be of importance if I'm writing about an enduring issues essay? Like maybe who was involved in that process that helped keep those prices low? Cheap labor. Cheap labor was used. Remember guys, going back to way earlier in the school year, all those people were losing their jobs on the farms because of new machinery on the farms, and the rich people were buying out the small farms. So I'm desperate for work now. I'm moving into a city, and I'll take whatever job's available to me. And the business owners love that, right? They see these people so desperate for work that they're willing to take whatever wage is being thrown their way. Cool. Outside information. Here's where you try to brainstorm anything you can remember about the Industrial Revolution that's not here. Maybe someone can remind me why the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. What did they have that made it special? Because it could have started anywhere. What was special about Britain? Right. Britain had an abundance of natural resources. That's the wording that the Regents love to use, abundance. This is good just general review for the Regents multiple choice stuff. Does anyone recall those two really important resources for industrialization? Coal and iron. Steel is basically a more purified version of iron. Excellent. Kind of said it before, guys, like what led all these people moving into cities and find themselves willing to work in these factories? What happened to people? Where were they losing their jobs? Okay, right? So people migrated to cities looking for jobs in factories because they lost their jobs on the farms. Okay, I don't have to go too crazy. I'm not going to write down the reasons why they did that, but it's a good backstory. What else do we remember about the Industrial Revolution? The document's about factories, right? Do we remember anything about life in a factory? At that time, anyway, right? People worked long hours. Right? We're talking usually 14 to 16-hour days. That's a lot of hours. How were the conditions early on? Bad working conditions. And this would all change once the government steps in and passes some laws. We're talking like early Industrial Revolution. Who do we see working in those early factories that might cause us to go, ooh, today? Yeah, child labor was kind of common, right? So all outside information that I could maybe use to supplement some discussion about the Industrial Revolution. Maybe we don't use all of it, but it's just a brainstorm. Definitely do as much brainstorming as possible. Name of the event. What would you call the event in this document? It should be pretty easy. Give it a title. Industrial Revolution in Britain, right? Very good. Perfect title. Even if you just wrote Industrial Revolution or Industrialization or Machines in Britain, that's fine. It's just got to be a little bit relevant to the document. You just want to give it a title so that we can refer to it in like the introduction for our essay. The last part, maybe the outside information is also hard, but the last part I think is the hardest. Brainstorming possible enduring issues. Like what, and again, it has to be based on the document, right? Let's not base it on outside information. What's in this document that could be an example of an enduring issue? Okay, cheap labor, that's an issue. Interesting, yes. Interconnectedness. Okay, and again, guys, interconnectedness is not always problematic. As long as it's problematic sometimes and it causes some people issues sometimes, it's good, right? When two places are connected together, someone might benefit from that, someone might not. Okay, if all of a sudden, if you're living in a place like, I don't know, India, and everyone's just buying cheap British stuff, that might put Indian businesses out of business. So there could be a negative side effect from all this trade. right? People don't, in America, work in factories so much anymore. All those jobs went to other countries because we are so interconnected. So I would call that a problem sometimes for some people. Anything else? I'm going to give you one. You tell me how this might apply. Impact of capitalism. Based on what you know about capitalism, how might this be in that document? I don't think they're talking about the selfishness of the factory owners in that document, but it's certainly talking about people opening up factories to make a profit, right? Without that entrepreneurial drive, I guess, right? Telling people that you can make all the money in the world available to you if you can, right? If you take on the initiative, that's why these factories got started in the first place, right? Without that profit motive, why am I going to open up this factory? That's a really difficult thing to do. There's got to be some kind of incentive there. Okay, so we analyzed the first document. I gave you notes for the second one, and we talked about it, okay? And just to kind of reiterate the process here, generally speaking, you want to take some notes about who, what, when, where, why, right? Try to focus on like how people are being impacted in that document. Every time you get a document, guys, on the Enduring Issues essay, it's going to focus on people being affected in some way. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to write an Enduring Issues essay about them. So when you're talking about who, what, when, where, and why, maybe you want to focus on the impacts that the document is having on people. You brainstorm outside information, you try to give the event in question a title the best you can, and probably in the most difficult sense, and maybe the most important sense, you gotta brainstorm some enduring issues. Because once you're done reading and analyzing all 5, you gotta go back and say, oh man, is there one common in at least 3 out of the 5? There's going to be, okay, but it's up to you to find that, and then you're gonna choose to write about that issue in your essay. All right, so it would be a good idea to repeat this process when you guys take your Regents on June 17th. So what I would like you to do is, for document 3 now, right here, repeat this process, okay? Make these 4 columns underneath document 3 in the packet. All right, guys, so let's read this one together. It's short, but it's not the easiest. It's from this guy named George Soros. Maybe you've heard that name before, a Hungarian-American investor, businessman, and philanthropist. Okay, so someone who has enough money on hand that they could just go throwing it out to people, right, to spread goodwill. That's what a philanthropist does, right? He has published books and articles on finance and on public policy. Finance is money. Public policy is government action. The disparity, meaning difference in the treatment of labor and capital, is an essential feature of the global capitalist system as it is currently organized. Let's try to break down every sentence and try to understand. What's another word for labor? Workers, yes, okay, workers. Capital in this context, guys, means like the factory or the factory owner, right? The person with the financial capital that's making investments. So the difference in the treatment of labor and capital is an essential feature, right? We saw that in capitalism every time we studied it. Without government involvement for like minimum wage and stuff, you get people making a lot of money if they own the factory, and then possibly really low wages for everybody else. So right away, I'm kind of seeing maybe possibly inequality as being an enduring issue here, or the impact of capitalism, right? Without regulation, you get this difference in wealth. Capital moves, remember capital meaning factories. Capital moves to countries where it finds cheap labor and other favorable conditions. We've seen that time and time again in history, right? The factories are in Asian countries where the labor costs less, right? Some countries don't have the same kinds of minimum wage laws. Hence, the iPhone is not assembled here, it's assembled elsewhere. He's saying here, though, that this helps those countries to develop. A number of them have made remarkable progress. Outside information. What's a country that we've learned about that has made remarkable progress ever since they opened themselves up to outside countries coming in and building factories? China, very good. Okay, remember Deng Xiaoping in the 80s was like, hey, economic reform, bring in capitalism. So, remember they were behind the times because of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. So all those factories started opening up in China. Gradually, right, through cultural diffusion, that society gets more modern technology and more job opportunities happen for China. But negative, developed countries lose jobs. The difference between developed and developing countries was something from the Edpuzzle video that you were supposed to complete. A developed country is like the United States, someone who's already gone through the process of modernizing and industrializing. A developing country is still doing that. There are many parts of the world that have not yet had an industrial revolution. So the developed country loses jobs, right? And we know that, right? The United States doesn't have the manufacturing jobs. Those jobs are now overseas. Developed countries lose jobs, but the gains from trade allow new jobs, often with greater value added, to be created. Right? So maybe in America, we don't manufacture the phone, but it creates an opportunity for people to design software for the phone. Right? That job did not exist before, right? App stores and people developing computer software. That's a new job that's in America that was not around 20, 30 years ago. There's also a certain amount of migration, both legal and illegal, to the rich countries to fill jobs that cannot be filled locally. We've seen that in this country for decades now, right? People legally and illegally coming here in search of work. Should be kind of relevant, right? But workers in the countries that offer cheap labor are often deprived of the right to organize and are mistreated in other ways. China is notorious in this respect. What does it mean if labor is organizing? We've used a different term for that in this class. Workers organizing is another way of saying coming together. What's that thing that we've talked about where workers come together as a group for some common purpose, Kat? Unions. Okay, in this context, in this case, it means organizing labor is creating labor unions. Some countries have that being illegal, that workers can't do that. Is that maybe an example of lack of freedom as an issue? Is it maybe an example of people being mistreated, right? Workers, like unfair conditions for workers? Yeah, absolutely. All right, so what we have to do now is make some notes for that document. So for document 3, what are some of the big ideas, who, what, when, where, why, for this source? What is happening here? Give me something that's happening. Unfair working conditions, and people don't have the right to unionize. Factory owners and factory workers have differences in wealth, right? He kind of says that in the beginning of the document, right? In capitalism, if the government does not really get involved, factory owners make a lot of money. Workers who get paid low wages don't, right? So there's like a natural disparity there. Right? He's not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. He's just commenting on the fact of it, the reality of it. Right? The reason why we don't have as much of a disparity in America is because we have those minimum wage laws. What's happening to job opportunities? Okay, right, so we've got developed countries losing jobs and developing countries gaining jobs. Right, this has been a thing in this country for like the last 40 years. Most things that Americans purchased used to be made in America. But now because of globalization, right, the world is interconnected more than ever before through trade. We've got airplanes, trains, cars. A company can operate in multiple places. A company could say, you know what, I don't want to pay American minimum wage. I will assemble the phone in an Asian country and then import it back to America. It makes Apple a lot of money, but what about the American worker who maybe could have made the iPhone? That person maybe doesn't have a job anymore. And they might have to say to themselves, oh man, I was working in a factory on an assembly line. What are my options now? I got to go find something else, right? And it might be hard to go from factory work to computer software engineer. That takes some serious education and skill development, right? I don't know how to do that. And I went to college for 6 years. No one ever taught me how to design software. It's tough. Cool. Let's talk about outside information. Can we brainstorm anything that might connect? The document mentions China. Maybe someone could blow my mind. Does somebody remember the guy in China in the 80s who started to allow capitalism in China? Deng Xiaoping brought capitalism to China in the 1980s. It's not until then that you get all these factories opening up inside of China. So it's just a good piece of outside information there. You always want to come up with something. You're going to have to have a little outside information in every one of your body paragraphs. It'll only make your essay better. Cool. So this is kind of tough for this document. If you were to call this event in history something, give this event a name, could we give it a title? Maybe a couple of words to kind of recap everything that's going on here? Labor problems. I'm going to call it developing countries because it's not focused specifically on China in all cases. I like it. That works for me. As long as you give it something that's kind of connected. Okay, enduring issues. What are some of the big, broad issues that humans are facing in this document? Ooh, good for you. Impact of capitalism. That's a tough one to kind of see there, right? Capitalism is that economic system, guys, right? Yes, we are a capitalistic country, but you have to keep in mind that we're kind of getting away from pure capitalism in America, right? There's more government involvement. Whenever you slap minimum wage into a country, it's not really capitalism anymore. But if you have capitalism and you allow business owners to pay workers whatever they want, That's what leads to the disparity, right? That's what leads to the low wages and why maybe some corporations are putting their factories in other countries. Mistreatment of workers. It says it right at the bottom there. And I would argue that mistreatment of workers is a problem that we've had forever, 100%. Right? Think about the people who built the Egyptian pyramids. I guarantee you they were not having a grand old time. The Egyptians did not have wheels. How do you have a pyramid with no wheel? They just slid the things around on sleds in the dirt, those big stones, and carried them around. Any other enduring issues here? Okay, lack of freedom, because we see workers in some countries don't have the ability to form unions. It's been legal in America since the 1930s. How so? I agree with you. Yeah, without the Industrial Revolution, you wouldn't have people working in factories being mistreated. I'll take it. I think there's maybe one more thing here that we can choose for an issue. I would like you to write down this. Outsourcing of jobs. Something, again, that I talked about in the Edpuzzle video, if you guys did that. If a job is outsourced, that means one day someone had a job doing that in America, and then because there's cheap labor elsewhere, the job moves. Right? Maybe we could throw that in there as well. Cheap labor is another enduring problem. Sounds great, okay? But it's problematic for the person being paid next to nothing. As long as it's a problem for somebody, it's a problem. Cheap labor is great for the business owner, not for the worker in a lot of cases. Good, guys. Very good. Excellent. Let's go to document 4. Let's keep the fun rolling. Okay, child labor and global free trade. So I'm already thinking, oh, maybe child labor is here. We know child labor is an enduring issue. The minimum working age set in the International Labor Organizations, it's the ILO, one of those intergovernmental agencies that are trying to improve the world. When they had a convention, they set a minimum working age at 15, although in special circumstances, it may be 14. Right, so at one point, they said, all these countries got down on the table and said, what's the acceptable working age? 15 should be the age. No one should be working under 15. That's what they said anyway. Yet in 2000, the ILO estimated that there were 211 million children between the ages of 5 and 14 working around the world. This equates to just under 1/5 of all children in this age group. It's a lot, 20%. Of these children, about 73 million were younger than 10 years old. This seems like exploitation of the worst kind, and often it is. What does it mean if I'm exploiting somebody? Forcing someone to do something, taking advantage of somebody, right? Is exploitation of workers a problem we've had to deal with a long time? Absolutely, right? So I'm already seeing child labor as an enduring issue. I'm seeing exploitation of workers as an enduring issue, right? Slavery existed for hundreds of years. That's pure exploitation right there, right? Compared to the World Trade Organization, something you might have heard of, the ILO is almost without power, prompting critics of globalization to argue for a greater role for the WTO in enforcing labor standards. So basically what they're saying here is we should enforce this more. It's one thing to say, oh, all workers should be over age 15, but someone has to enforce that. That's a hard thing to do, right? How can you go to a country and say, oh, you've got kid workers here, that's all illegal now? It's not easy. Many labor violations have nothing to do with international trade and may have no impact on it. In many countries, for example, child labor is not seen as exploitation, but as a normal part of family life. Right? Maybe your parents own a restaurant or some kind of business, and they ask you after school to come help them out in the store. Some people, if you're under age 15, might call that child labor. Other people are like, this is just what we do in the family. Just chill, yo. Children work alongside their parents and other relatives in extended family businesses. Others, less fortunate, work in factories, fields, or mines. So what they're saying here that there are different kinds of child labor, right? You with your family in the restaurant together, that's one thing. But if you're harvesting toxic chemicals or materials in another part of the world, maybe that's not so nice. Some have argued for greater ratification and enforcement of these conventions, meaning these meetings where they decided to enforce new standards. Although a worldwide legal ban on child labor might sound like a good idea, it could actually make matters worse, further driving struggling families into poverty. Poverty, another enduring issue. Right? Because kids would not be working if their families weren't poor. Otherwise, why would they be doing such dangerous tasks, right? A recent agreement negotiated in Brazil suggests a popular solution, or a possible solution rather. There, a successful pilot project pays subsidies to poor families if all the kids regularly attend school. So the government of Brazil goes and says, okay, I know how we can crack down on child labor. The families that keep their kids in school will give them extra cash payouts so the kids don't have to go into the mines, okay, which is controversial in and of itself, because like, where does that money come from? But still, they're trying to come up with a solution, right, to help out poor families who, it's good for your kids to be in school because you're going to learn skills to go get better jobs in the future. That's the whole point of you guys being forced to be here, okay? So it shouldn't be too tough. Let's try to summarize first the big ideas for what's happening, who is it happening to, maybe why is it happening if possible. The why is important, guys, right? That kind of shows you could explain things in your essay, right? It's not really enough to just say, oh, kids are working in mines. You want to try to comment and explain maybe why that's happening. So give me some of the things we see in this article. Child labor. Okay. Maybe we can refine that a little bit. Maybe we'll say millions of children in the world are employed under age 15. Are they all working similar types of jobs? What's going on with these kids in their work? Some are being exploited in factories or mines. Some work alongside their families, right? So it's kind of hard to solve the child labor problem in a very standardized sense because kids work in different contexts. Right? Sometimes you're just helping out a family. Sometimes you're being exploited. It's not the same thing. Anything else going on in this document? Okay. Kids being forced to work due to poverty. And I think the bottom part of the document, there's one more piece of the puzzle here, one more part of the story. Right? We're not just sitting around as a community and looking at this and saying, oh, that's nice that that's happening. No, what are some people trying to do? Okay, so we've got governments trying to stop child labor. Right? We're not just standing by and watching. Governments and organizations in the world are trying to stop child labor. Right? So I think we covered pretty much every part of the story with our bullet points. I think you could summarize the document in like 2, 3, 4 bullet points, right? Try to capture every part of the document, the big broad ideas. How about some outside information? Can we brainstorm any situations that we've learned about in which there was child labor, bad working conditions, maybe a current example of this? Child labor occurred in British factories during the Industrial Revolution. I'm just going to put IR. Okay, so this kind of demonstrates that these enduring problems are continuing. We've got child labor in British factories around 1800. You've got kids in cobalt mines in Africa today. So I'm just going to put that down since you're going to see that this week in your homework. Kids working in cobalt mines in Africa. Cobalt, a precious earth metal that we need for our cell phones. Another one that's tough to get is lithium. And every rechargeable battery has lithium. And as the world gets more electrified with things like Tesla cars and hybrid cars, right, you need bigger batteries, more batteries. Got to get those resources somehow. Cool. Can we call this something? What would you call this event in history or development? Give it a title. Can we start with this maybe? Maybe could we just go child labor around the world? Doesn't have to be perfect. Again, guys, it has to be relevant in some way. We're not going to grade you on what kind of title you give this. Just don't call it God, you go to McDonald's, and you're fine. Okay, easy for this one. Enduring issues. Child labor, poverty. Kids would not be working if families weren't poor. And it does mention that in the document, right? We want to keep them to the document. What else? Or the kids being treated nicely. Maybe not. Mistreatment of workers. Right? They use the word in the document, exploitation. If I'm exploiting somebody, I'm not treating you nicely. So mistreatment or exploitation, they mean the same thing. I'll just put mistreatment. Anything else? If they're working, they're not going to school. Is there an enduring issue there? What are they lacking? That's maybe problematic in some cases. Lack of education. Is there an idea or a system that would allow companies to hire kids without government interference? We keep seeing that in a lot of these documents. What's the economic system? When not regulated, you are allowed to hire kids and no one's going to tell you otherwise. Let's put it down. Impact of capitalism. And I don't mean to bash on capitalism, because capitalism has tremendous amounts of positive aspects, right? What I'm kind of talking about is completely unregulated capitalism, right? If the government has no standards for safety or child labor or minimum wage, that could be problematic at times, right? You wouldn't want to work for $1 an hour. Document 5. Forgive me if my pronunciation is a little bit off. I think it's pronounced Guiyu. Guiyu is a town in China famous for recycling electronic waste, or e-waste, right? When you guys bring an old phone somewhere for a trade-in, if they can't resell that, they will take that and send it somewhere, and then it's all broken down, and maybe the metals are melted and used for something else, or parts of it are sold, okay? It's a big industry. Many involved in the e-waste business migrated from poor regions in China to gain work with the hope of opening their own business. This guy, Andrew Blackwell, visited Guiyu in 2011, so this is not that long ago. Theirs, the Han family, was one of thousands of similar workshops in town. Guiyu's entire economy is based on tearing apart old electronics and reselling the components and raw materials. Walk the streets, and you will see building after building with a workshop at ground level and family quarters on the upper floors. Okay, so people are basically having to live where they work. So maybe living conditions aren't the greatest, especially since you'll see how dirty this is. It's a dirty business. Computers are full of all kinds of things that are bad for you, things other than the internet, Snapchat. And when you tear them apart or melt them down or saw them into pieces, a portion of those toxic substances is released. In a place like Guiyu, with what I'll call relaxed workplace standards, that's code for the government doesn't really tell the businesses what to do, right? Capitalism again. You end up with workshops full of lead dust and other heavy metals and clouds of who the hell knows what floating through the streets. The water is laced with PCBs and PBDEs, those are chemicals, and other hazardous acronyms. The air, the water, the dust. In Guiyu, it comes with promises of cancer, nerve damage, and poisoned childhood development. Exporting toxic waste across borders, especially to developing countries, is supposed to be illegal. The Basel Convention, the treaty that outlaws it, was nearly 20 years old by the time I visited this place in 2011. In the case of electronic waste, though, the convention is easy to circumvent. As the Green Electronics Coordinator at the ever-present Greenpeace has said, the common way exporters get around existing regulations is to relabel e-waste as second-hand goods for recycling. Okay, it's getting a little complicated towards the end there, but I think we can make some sense of this in a big picture sense. What are some of the big ideas for document 5? Who, what, when, where, why? Good. Water is being polluted in Guiyu, which is affecting the health of the people who live there. Okay, so we've got part of the what, we've got the who, right, the people of Guiyu, we've got the where, because we got the name of the town in China there. Can we do a little bit of the why? Like, why is that happening? The chemicals don't just come out of nowhere, right? What's being done that's causing these chemicals to be released? Okay, right, so we've got the e-waste industry involves breaking down old electronics to resell or reuse the parts, okay? And when you break apart a computer hard drive or other components of it with these chemicals, especially something like a battery, you will have chemicals that you're breathing in or on your hands. Okay, that's good. Outside information. This is tough for this one. Do you guys remember learning earlier in the year when I gave you a homework assignment about fast fashion and its effects? You have a vague memory of that? Do you guys remember some of the negative effects of producing so much clothing that we just kind of toss away? Like, what's involved in the process of making these things that might be similar to this? Okay, so let's put this down. Fast fashion industry equals textile production, often involves using chemical dyes which pollute the land and water. Okay, that was something from that article, right? These like polyester is basically a chemical that you're using to make textiles. It's not an organic substance like cotton, and a lot of cheap clothing is made with that. And just like with e-waste, it can be a pollutant. All right, guys, so the next step in the process is we're gonna finish up talking about document 5. All right, so we started looking at this document yesterday, and what you're gonna do is, for the sake of time, I would like you all to just look at the notes that I have here on the screen and jot down anything that's missing on your document packet, right? So if you remember, we're making these 4 columns of notes, one for main ideas, brainstorming some outside information, titling the name of the historical development, and we're brainstorming some possible enduring issues. Okay, so after looking at Doc 5, these are the basic main ideas of the document. And if you remember, we learned about fast fashion earlier in the year, right? So this process of manufacturing products often leads to toxins being released, and that affects people's health if they're working on clothes in the factories. And those chemical dyes often get into the environment. This demonstrates basically how we can have some connections here, right, between multiple instances of environmental damage due to some type of industry. Okay, so we're done looking at the documents now. The next step in the process is to figure out which enduring issue to write about. That's why we brainstormed enduring issues for every one of these documents. Your next step now is to go back and figure out, okay, what enduring issues are common in at least 3 out of the 5. There could be more than one. Then you have to decide for yourself which one of those you want to write about. And when you go through them, there are a number that appear in multiple documents. The impact of capitalism, the mistreatment of workers. Another way to call, you could also call mistreatment of workers bad working conditions. Those are kind of similar issues. And inequality. Those 3 are found in a number of the documents. Okay? Remember, you're going to write a body paragraph per document. So you got to pick one common issue that's in at least 3 of the documents. And pick the one that you're the most comfortable writing about. If you're not comfortable drawing connections between ideas about capitalism and effects in the documents, right, problems that are in the documents, then maybe that's not the enduring issue for you. Maybe mistreatment of workers or inequality are easier for you to write about. Because remember, you have to basically use the documents to explain how people are being affected by one of those issues. Choose the one that you're the most comfortable with. Okay, so far what you got to do is finish the chart for document 5. Make sure, maybe pause the video and go back and fill in those pieces on your document packet, the paper. Choose your enduring issue. Okay, remember, you got to choose one that's common in at least 3 out of the 5. And now we're going to move on. Okay, so back to the enduring issues checklist here. I gave you basically a step-by-step procedure for how to do this. Okay, so for the introduction paragraph, you're now turning your attention to step 3. Develop your introduction and thesis. These are the steps that you need to complete in your introduction paragraph. You've done this before. Okay, the first one I did for you. I defined what an enduring issue is. Your introduction paragraph, you're going to indent, and this is going to be your first sentence. And all these blanks you're filling in, right? For number 2, let's assume for a second that, I don't know, so me personally, I know a lot about capitalism. I can write about the impact of capitalism with ease. So for number 2, the impact of capitalism would fill in my blank here. For number 3, the impact of capitalism is when. Okay, so for that blank, I would have to maybe explain what capitalism is, okay, and how maybe it affects people. And sometimes there could be some overlap here, right? So for number 4, maybe I put impact of capitalism as an enduring issue because, and here I'll mention, it leads to lack of government regulation, it leads to really low wages, it leads to bad working conditions. Okay, so there could be some overlap between 3 and 4, and I want to drive that point home, guys. This is, you can deviate from this. This is just meant to be a guideline to ensure that you have all the pieces. Maybe you combine points 3 and 4 into a couple of sentences. The point is, in your introduction paragraph, you're telling the reader what your enduring issue is without using first person. You're explaining what the issue means and some examples of how that issue affects people. Preferably, the effects on people are the ones that are in the documents, not just some made-up effect that you got from just your brain. It should be based on the evidence presented to you in the 3 documents that you're choosing to write about. The last part here is where you're telling the reader, you're basically making the building blocks of your essay. You're indicating to the reader what your 3 body paragraphs are going to be about. Right, so this is demonstrated by blank, blank, and blank. These are the historical examples that demonstrate your enduring issue. Right, so that's why if you go back to the chart, we specified or we created a name for the historical event. Okay, so if let's say you're writing about documents 3, 4, and 5. That means in those 3 blanks, I'm going to say this can be demonstrated by labor problems in developing countries, child labor around the world, and e-waste recycling. That would be your last sentence of the introduction paragraph. Again, if you're writing about documents 3, 4, and 5. So for those last 3 blanks, just copy the name of the historical development that we chose to put in our charts. And then you're done with your introduction paragraph. Okay? So again, follow these steps as best as you can based on an enduring issue that you are comfortable writing about, and also an enduring issue that's in at least 3 out of the 5 documents. I know that's a lot to do. Your next task is to begin writing your body paragraphs. And again, I gave you some building blocks. Here's a list of what to include. Here's some basic ways that you might want to structure your paragraph. And notice how they all have like a highlight color here. That means if you go down to my sample paragraph, each one of those colors lines up with the step of the process. I would recommend reading my example paragraph. Yes, this is going above and beyond with a lot of outside information, right? Because I know a lot about this stuff. But you should be aiming to follow the same procedure for constructing your body paragraph, right? So take a look. One historical example that demonstrates, for me, it would be the impact of capitalism is, and for me, it was Britain's tea trade with India, which was document number 2. So that's my first sentence of body paragraph number 1. The effects of this issue are shown in a document called blank, written by blank. Sometimes you don't have an author's name, right? This is meant to be, the rules for this are meant to be broken a little bit, right? So if you went back to number 2, the name of the document, you could simply call, in a document call, instead of saying in a document call, maybe say in a Lipton tea advertisement published by the Illustrated London News. Okay, here I don't have an author or I don't have a title, I just have Lipton tea ad and I have who published it, not so much who created it. So you have to kind of bend the rules a little bit. Not every sentence frame is going to work exactly the same in every circumstance. The point is you're indicating to the reader now what your document is and who created or who put it out to the world. Step 3, explain the main idea of the document in terms of where and when the document is taking place. So if you look at number 3 here in red, that's down here. This is where I basically talk about the document in a very general sense, like what's kind of going on. So I'm kind of summarizing the big ideas. Tea was one of the major products exported from India to Britain. This was a growing industry, and, quote, by 1900 there were around 4,000 tea estates in North and South India, parentheses, Doc 2. Once you tell me a piece of information from the document, whether it's paraphrased or quoted, you got to put a parentheses and cite the document. Okay, you got to tell me where you got your information from. This is how you're proving that you're not plagiarizing information. As long as you do this one time per body paragraph, you're good. And remember, one body paragraph for each document you're writing about. This industry generated very large profits for Britain. This is due to the fact that companies such as Lipton's Teas were able to acquire tea directly from the farms in India and sell directly to consumers, thus cutting out the middleman. Really, really basic explanation of what is happening in the document. Okay, here's where you start including some outside information. A great way to demonstrate outside information is to describe, if you can, the historical circumstances. Again, if you can't do that, then this purple part of your body paragraph will not apply to you. Okay, all these components are assuming that you are capable of doing this. And if you are capable of doing it, do it. Because I'm demonstrating to you guys how to get a perfect score on the essay. I'd like to aim high if possible. So explain how or why this event took place, or what led to it taking place. Okay, so sometimes in a document, the document itself will tell you why it's happening. Right? So for example, in document 5, it's mentioning that people are contracting cancer. Well, the why is already in the document, right? It's because they're being exposed to toxic chemicals. So you can mention that, right? Or you can go back in time and show some outside information, right? So in this particular case, right, it's about the British tea industry. I gave some historical circumstances for why the British were in India in the first place. I'm not going to bore you with reading this right now, but I'm explaining the British East India Company, touching upon imperialism, how British interference led to a rebellion. Okay, that all came before the advertisement. I'm already showing the reader I have a firm grasp of outside information, which is always a good thing. The blue part here is explaining the impact that the issue is having on people in that document. Okay, and I know this gets kind of confusing because maybe in your who, what, when, where, and why, maybe you already touched on that before. But if you didn't already do that, just again, the framework, guys, the sentence frames, you can rearrange them a little bit to suit your own needs. I put those here so that you know not to skip certain parts. Right? The whole point of an enduring issues essay is to explain how the issue affects people. So in blue here, I'm writing a lot of outside information, but also information from the document about how the impact of capitalism is felt by people in document 2, right? There's less land available for growing agricultural products. That's a way that people are being impacted, right? Because they don't have enough food for themselves anymore. All right, yes, that's outside information, but again, you have to just emphasize that people are being affected by your chosen enduring issue. Okay, very important. Make sure it's there. Maybe the order in which you write about things varies. Maybe you choose to combine, for example, the red section and the blue section together, right? Maybe as part of your who, what, when, where, and why, you're already touching upon how people are affected. That's fine, okay? Again, I just have these separated out so you can kind of ensure that you're touching on document summary, okay, and also explaining the impact and also having opportunities to include outside information. One part that is absolutely important is this yellow section here. What I want to do is explain how the issue still persists or has changed over time. You're going to do that in each of your body paragraphs. Okay, so the impact of capitalism means that in this particular context for document 2, the agricultural land in India was converted to growing cash crops, right? Which made people not have enough food. That is impacting people's way of life, right? Well, that's changed. And that's what I'm writing about in the yellow, right? This particular impact of capitalism has changed over time. And again, I'm now demonstrating my outside information, right? Through the efforts of Gandhi, India became independent, right? So no longer are they being forced to do whatever the British want. And since the Green Revolution, all these new agricultural technologies are being used to help Indian people grow more food so that they can be self-sufficient. Okay, so this particular impact of capitalism doesn't apply to India anymore. So I'm explaining that. Okay, you have to, right, the whole point of enduring issue means like change and continuity over time. You have to touch on that a little bit in each of your body paragraphs. It may not be as robust as what I'm writing about here, but you got to make sure that you're doing that. So again, big broad strokes. Topic sentence, okay? Tell me basically what the document is and when it was written. Summarize the document. Tell me how people were affected by the issue in that document. Try to provide some outside information, okay? Either use outside information to talk about continuity or change, after the fact. Maybe use your outside information to tell me historical circumstances if you can. Again, maybe the purple doesn't apply. If you don't know the historical circumstances, you can't write about them. But show me some outside information somewhere in each of your body paragraphs.